If you believe that the promises we make should mean something, and that a woman scorned is a force of nature, then you need to hear my story. Make sure you subscribe and hit that like button, because you are about to witness the spectacular downfall of a man who thought his vows were disposable. Silence in the church was absolute. It was a cold, heavy silence that swallowed the sound of my own ragged breathing. Just an hour before, this same hall had been filled with music and laughter for the vow renewal ceremony I had spent a year planning. Now, it was empty. The guests were gone. The beautiful flower arrangements seemed to mock me from the altar. And my husband David, the man to whom I had just repledged my life, was gone too. I was still in my wedding dress, a beautiful ivory gown I had bought to celebrate 20 years of what I thought was a happy marriage. In my hands, I clutched the handwritten vows I had just read to him, my voice thick with love and tears. In sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, till death do us part. The words, my promises, echoed back at me in the crushing silence. NMY 7 daughters, my beautiful, wonderful girls, stood in a protective semicircle around me. Their faces, usually so full of life, were pale with shock and confusion. The youngest, 7-year-old Lily, tugged on my dress. "Mommy, where did Daddy go?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I couldn't answer her, because I had just found out where he'd gone. Not from him, but from a single, devastating text message that had arrived on my phone moments after he'd kissed me at the altar. It wasn't from David. It was from his lawyer. Pursuant to the pre-signed dissolution agreement executed this morning, David has vacated the marital home. All assets have been transferred as per the agreement. A car is waiting outside to take you and the children to the new property. Do not attempt to contact him. Dissolution agreement? New property? It made no sense. I looked down at the stack of business papers he had asked me to sign that very morning, telling me they were just routine tax forms for his company. I had signed them without a second thought, my mind on the celebration ahead. I had trusted him completely. NMY oldest daughter, 20-year-old Grace, who had been trying to call her father, lowered her phone, her face ashen. "His phone is disconnected," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Mom, the house. I just checked the county website. The house was sold 2 weeks ago." NTHE floor seemed to drop out from under me. The vow renewal, the expensive party, the dress, the promises. It was all a lie. A meticulously crafted stage play designed for one purpose: to be the final, brutal act of our marriage. He hadn't just left me. He had orchestrated a public spectacle of love and commitment to distract me, while he stripped me of everything we had ever built. He had made me recite my vows to him, knowing that his own were already broken, shattered into a million pieces. NHE didn't just break his promises. He had turned them into a weapon. He had made our sacred vows the punchline to the cruelest joke I had ever known. And as I stood there, surrounded by my 7 daughters in an empty church, a cold, hard fury began to replace the shock. He thought he had won. He thought he had orchestrated the perfect, clean exit. But he had made one critical miscalculation. He had forgotten who he had married. He had forgotten the promises I had made. And I had promised to love him till death do us part. He may have declared our marriage dead, but I was about to make sure he paid for the funeral, and David was a man who built things. When I met him, he was a young, ambitious architect with dreams of designing skyscrapers that would scrape the sky. I was a history major, fascinated by the stories that old buildings told. We were a perfect match. He was the future, I was the past, and together we built a present that felt like a fortress of love and shared dreams. NHI's proposals were always grand. He proposed marriage on a trip to Rome, on one knee in front of the Pantheon, promising to build me a life as beautiful and enduring as the ancient city. And for a long time, he kept that promise. He started his own architectural firm, and his talent was undeniable. He became incredibly successful, known for his sleek, modern designs and his meticulous attention to detail. NWE built a life that was the envy of our friends. A stunning, minimalist house that he had designed himself. A life filled with travel, art, and the constant joyful chaos of a growing family. Our daughters. One by one, they arrived, each a unique and cherished gift. Grace, the responsible one. Olivia, the free spirit. Chloe, the bookworm, Sophia, the athlete, Ava, the musician, Mia, the comedian, and finally, little Lily, our surprise, our caboose. But Chloe take her.
I never saw his love for them as anything less than absolute. Unlike other men who might have craved a son, David seemed to revel in being the king of a castle filled with queens. He called them his 7 wonders of the world. He designed their bedrooms, built them elaborate tree houses, and attended every dance recital and soccer game. He was the perfect father, the perfect husband, or so I thought. NTHE first crack in the foundation appeared so subtly I almost missed it. It was about 5 years before the vow renewal. David's firm won a massive, career-defining contract to design a new corporate headquarters for a global tech company. The project was all-consuming. He started working longer hours, traveling constantly. The distance between us grew, but I chalked it up to the stress of his work. I became the sole anchor of our family, managing the house, the girls, and our busy lives, believing I was supporting his dream, which was also our dream. NHE started talking about legacy. It was a new word for him. This project, Amelia, he'd say, it's not just a building, it's my legacy. It's what I'll be remembered for. His focus shifted from our family to his name, his reputation. He became obsessed with the idea of permanence, of creating something that would outlast him. And around this time, he began to compartmentalize our finances. He created a complex series of trusts and corporations, explaining it to me as smart estate planning. He said it was to protect the girls, to ensure their futures were secure. I'm building a financial fortress for you, Amelia, he had promised. You and the girls will be safe, always. I, who had always found finances tedious, trusted him completely. He was the builder, the architect. I let him design our financial life just as he had designed our home. NTHE idea for the vow renewal was his. He presented it to me on our 19th anniversary as the ultimate romantic gesture. 20 years, 7 beautiful daughters, a lifetime of love, he had said, his eyes shining with sincerity. I want to stand up in front of everyone we know and promise it all to you again. And I was so touched, I wept. It felt like a homecoming, a way to reconnect after years of him being so consumed by his work. I threw myself into the planning, wanting every detail to be perfect. David was enthusiastically involved, sparing no expense. He hired the best caterers, the most beautiful venue, the old city church he knew I loved, and he even insisted on buying me a new wedding dress. Looking back, the signs were all there, hidden in plain sight. The way he insisted on a specific date, citing venue availability. The way he was suddenly so organized with paperwork, bringing home stacks of documents for me to sign, waving them off as, just tax stuff, honey, boring but necessary. The way he had been quietly selling off his smaller properties and assets, telling me he was consolidating for a bigger investment. NTHE morning of the ceremony was the final masterful stroke of his deception. He brought me breakfast in bed, along with one last file folder. Just a few more signatures, my love, and then the boring stuff is done forever, he'd said with a smile. I remember the papers felt thick, official. I saw words like dissolution and transfer, but he had his hand over most of the text, pointing to the signature lines. It's just legal jargon for moving assets between trusts, he'd explained patiently. It saves us a fortune in taxes. Sign here, here, and here. Then I can be your husband and not your accountant for the rest of the day. And I signed. I signed away my home, my savings, my security, my entire life, with the same pen I would later use to sign our vow renewal certificate. I signed it all away with a heart full of love and trust, while his was apparently full of nothing but cold, calculated deceit. He had used my love for him, my trust in him, as the key to unlock the fortress he had built, only to lock me out of it forever. The entire renewal, the grand romantic gesture, was nothing more than a closing ceremony on the sale of my life. NNTHE car waiting for us outside the church, was a sleek, black town car, as impersonal and cold as the lawyer's text message. The driver, a stoic man in a suit, simply held the door open, his face impassive. My daughters, huddled together like a flock of frightened birds, looked at me for guidance. My mind was still reeling, but a cold, hard resolve was beginning to form in the pit of my stomach. "Get in," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "All of you. Stick together." We drove in silence through the familiar streets of our city, then into a part of the countryside I didn't recognize. We pulled up to a large, imposing gate. It swung open to reveal a long driveway leading to a modern, sterile-looking house. It was one of David's designs. I recognized it instantly. Cold, angular, and completely isolated. It was surrounded by acres of manicured lawn, with no other houses in sight. It wasn't a home. It was a cage. NTHE driver unloaded our bags, a few suitcases I didn't recognize, packed by a stranger with clothes I'd never seen, and handed me a key card and a plain white envelope. Then he drove away, leaving the 7 of us standing in front of our new prison. Inside, the house was fully furnished with minimalist, uncomfortable-looking furniture. The kitchen was stocked with basic food. In the bedrooms, the closets contained more of the generic, ill-fitting clothes. He had provided for our basic survival, but had erased any trace of our identity. There were no family photos, no books, no personal trinkets. It was like a high-end witness protection safe house, and I opened the white envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for a substantial, but not astronomical, amount of money, and a 1-page letter. It wasn't from David. It was from his lawyer again. It stated that the check was a one-time, final settlement. The house was ours to live in, but the deed was held by a trust I couldn't touch. We were being provided for, but we were powerless. The letter ended with a final, chilling sentence. Any attempt to contest this agreement or contact David will result in the immediate forfeiture of the property and all funds. And it was the perfect trap. He had given us just enough to survive, but not enough to fight. He had isolated us, stripped us of our resources, and threatened us with homelessness if we dared to challenge him. He knew I would never risk putting our daughters out on the street. He had built his fortress, and this was the gilded cage he had designed for us. NTHE first few days were a blur of shock and grief. My girls were amazing. Grace, my eldest, took charge, organizing the younger ones, creating a sense of routine in the chaos. Olivia, my artist, found blank paper and started drawing, trying to bring some color into the sterile white walls. They were resilient, they were strong, but at night, I would hear them crying in their rooms. NMY own grief was a physical weight. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, the words of my vows echoing in my head. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, it felt like a part of my soul had been amputated. How could the man I had loved for 20 years, the father of my children, be capable of such monstrous, calculated cruelty? And I began to dig. Using the house's internet connection, I started to piece together the puzzle of David's new life. It wasn't hard to find. He hadn't just left me. He had left me for someone else. Her name was Katerina. She was the daughter of the billionaire CEO of the tech company whose headquarters he had designed. She was 25 years old, a socialite whose life was splashed all over gossip websites, and she was pregnant. NTHE. Truth hit me like a physical blow. His obsession with legacy wasn't about his buildings. It was about a son. After 7 daughters, he had found a younger woman who could potentially give him the male heir he secretly craved. He had traded his family of 7 wonders for the possibility of one son. He hadn't just left us. He had replaced us. NTHE public narrative, carefully crafted by his new PR team, was that he and I had had an amicable private separation months ago, and that the vow renewal was a, quote, celebration of our long friendship and co-parenting journey. It was a lie so audacious, so insulting, it made my blood boil. He was painting himself as a modern, enlightened man, while I was silenced, trapped in my cage, unable to tell the world the truth. NTHAT was his mistake. He thought the cage he built was perfect. He thought the threat of homelessness would keep me quiet. He thought my love for my daughters would make me passive. He was wrong. My love for my daughters was precisely what would make me fight. He had left me in a prison of his own design, but he had forgotten one thing about me. I was a history major, and I knew that even the most formidable fortresses have a weakness. I just had to find it. The first rule of escaping a prison is to understand its design. David's trap was built on 3 pillars: isolation, financial control, and the threat of losing the roof over our heads. To fight back, I had to dismantle each pillar, one by one. My counter-design began to take shape in the sterile silence of that house. NMY's first move was to break the isolation. I couldn't use my phone, which I suspected was being monitored, so I used my daughter's. Grace, my brilliant 20-year-old, had her own laptop and a university email account. It was a digital link to the outside world that David hadn't thought to control. "Grace," I said one evening, my voice low and urgent, "I need you to do something for me. It's important, and it has to be a secret." And I had her contact the one person I knew I could trust, my younger sister, Sarah. Sarah was a scrappy, no-nonsense journalist for a small investigative news outlet. I dictated a long, detailed email to her, laying out the entire sordid story: the fraudulent signing, the vow renewal sham, the gilded cage, the threats. I attached a photo of the lawyer's letter. I told her to be careful, to use encrypted channels, and to wait for my signal. Next, I tackled the financial control. The settlement check was our prison warden. Cashing it would mean accepting his terms, but not cashing it meant having no resources. I found a loophole. The check was made out to me, Amelia Sterling, but for years, for all our joint accounts and tax purposes, I had used my married name, Amelia Croft Sterling. It was a small discrepancy, but in the world of banking and law, small discrepancies can be powerful levers, and I instructed Grace to have my sister Sarah find me a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a shark, a specialist in high-stakes financial fraud. Sarah found the perfect candidate, a woman named Lena Petrova, notorious for taking on powerful, wealthy men and dismantling their empires. Through Grace's encrypted emails, I began a clandestine correspondence with Lena. She confirmed my suspicion about the check. "Don't cash it," she wrote. "The name discrepancy is our first foothold. We can argue you never legally received the settlement, which means you never agreed to the terms. It's thin, but it's a start." NTHE final pillar was the house itself. It was our cage, but it was also our only asset. David thought he had made it untouchable, held in a trust, but he had designed it. And I knew my husband's fatal flaw as an architect, his ego. He was a brand. Every house he designed was a testament to his genius, and he was meticulous about the details. And I started studying the house not as a home, but as one of his projects. I found the original blueprints, which he had arrogantly left stored in the home's Smart Hub system. I spent weeks poring over them, cross-referencing them with my memory of every conversation we'd ever had about his work. And then I found it. A weakness. And David had always been obsessed with using cutting-edge, often experimental, materials. In the blueprints for this house, I found a notation for a specific type of Italian composite cladding used on the exterior. I remembered him boasting about it years ago, how it was the future of sustainable design. I also remembered him complaining a year later that the manufacturer had issued a recall after the material was found to be unstable under certain climate conditions, prone to cracking and water damage. Went outside and examined the house's exterior. On the north-facing wall, hidden behind a row of ornamental trees, I found what I was looking for: a series of hairline cracks, almost invisible to the naked eye. And I took high-resolution photos and sent them to Lena. Her reply was swift and excited. "This is it, Amelia. This is the key. The house isn't just a cage, it's a liability." He knowingly built a house with faulty, recalled materials. As the designer and the one who placed you here, he is liable for endangering his own children. The threat of homelessness is gone. In fact, he's the one who put you in a home that is fundamentally unsafe. We can flip the entire narrative. NTHE counter-design was complete. We had a legal strategy, a weapon, and a way to tell our story. David thought he had built the perfect, inescapable trap, but he had built it with flawed materials. His arrogance was the crack in his own foundation, and I was about to hammer a wedge into it so hard his entire world would come crashing down. Lena Petrova's plan was a masterclass in strategic demolition. It was a three-pronged attack, launched simultaneously to create maximum chaos and leave David with no time to react. NTHE first prong was legal. Lena filed a massive lawsuit on my behalf. It wasn't a divorce proceeding. It was a suit for fraud, endangerment, and conspiracy. She didn't just name David. She named his firm, the trust that held the house, and Katerina's billionaire father, alleging he had conspired with David to hide assets. The centerpiece of the endangerment claim was the faulty cladding, complete with an expert report on the material's instability and potential for catastrophic failure. The lawsuit was filed with an emergency motion to freeze all of David's known assets, pending the fraud investigation. NTHE's second prong was financial. The day the lawsuit was filed, I walked into a bank with the uncashed settlement check. I didn't deposit it. I had the bank manager officially refuse it on the grounds of the name discrepancy and document the refusal. This legally solidified our claim that I had rejected his settlement, nullifying the threatening agreement. We now had the moral and legal high ground. NTHE third and most devastating prong was public. My sister Sarah, who had been waiting for the signal, published her story. It wasn't in some small local paper. She had partnered with a major, reputable international news organization. The story, titled "The Architect's Lie," went live the same morning the lawsuit was filed. It was an explosive, meticulously documented exposé. It had everything: the fairy tale marriage, the 7 daughters, the sham vow renewal, the lawyer's threatening letter, the gilded cage, and the damning detail of the faulty materials used in the house where he had imprisoned his children. It painted a picture not of an amicable separation, but of a sociopathic level of cruelty and deception. The story was accompanied by photos of my beautiful girls, looking lost and sad in the sterile, empty house. It ended with a quote from me. He promised, in sickness and in health. He didn't realize that by betraying his family, he had created the deepest sickness of all, and I will not rest until we are healthy again. NTHE fallout was immediate and spectacular. The story went viral, a firestorm of public outrage. David and Katerina, who were on a yacht in the Mediterranean, were hounded by paparazzi. The hashtag Architectsly trended for days. David's carefully crafted image as a design genius and enlightened modern man was shattered overnight. NHI's clients, including the tech giant whose headquarters he had designed, began to distance themselves. The story of him knowingly using faulty materials was a death blow to his professional reputation. No one wanted to live or work in a building designed by a man who would endanger his own children for convenience. His legacy project was now tainted by his personal scandal. Katerina's father, furious at being dragged into the lawsuit and the public mess, immediately cut ties. The financial fortress David thought he had secured for himself crumbled. His assets were frozen, his powerful benefactor was gone, and his income stream dried up as clients fled. NHE was trapped. He had built me a prison, but in doing so, he had built one for himself, brick by brick. He was isolated, financially crippled, and publicly disgraced. The pillars of his own trap had collapsed on top of him. The demolition was a success. Now, it was time to negotiate the terms of his surrender. And David's surrender was not graceful. It was the desperate, cornered thrashing of a man who had lost everything. His lawyers contacted Lena, begging for a settlement, trying to stop the bleeding. But we held all the cards. Lena was merciless in her negotiations. We didn't want his blood money. We wanted what was rightfully ours, and we wanted to ensure he could never harm us again. The final settlement was a complete capitulation on his part. May received 50% of his net worth, as it was on the day of the vow renewal, before the fraudulent transfers. This included half the value of his firm, his properties, and his investments. The original marital home, which he had sold, was repurchased from the new owners at a premium, and the deed was placed solely in my name. All the trusts he had created were dissolved. He was also required to fund college trust funds for all 7 daughters and maintain life insurance policies with them as the sole beneficiaries. But the most important victory was not financial. As part of the settlement, David had to sign a legally binding document, a public affidavit, admitting to the fraudulent nature of the dissolution agreement and the deceptive circumstances of the vow renewal. He had to publicly admit that he had lied. He had to give me back my name, my dignity, and my truth. NTHE Day, the settlement was signed. My daughters and I moved back into our home. Walking through the front door was a surreal experience. It was our house, filled with our memories, our photos, our lives. It was as if the nightmare had never happened. But we were different. We were stronger, more united, and fiercely protective of each other. Life began to find a new rhythm. I used my portion of the settlement to create a new foundation, both literally and figuratively. I established a charitable foundation called the Vow Project, dedicated to providing legal aid and financial counseling to women who had been victims of financial abuse and fraudulent divorces. My story became a source of strength for others, a roadmap for fighting back against powerful, manipulative partners. Lena Petrova sat on the board, and my sister Sarah ran its public outreach. NMY Daughters thrived. The experience, as traumatic as it was, had forged an unbreakable bond between them. They had seen the worst in a man they loved, but they had also seen the incredible strength and resilience of their mother and their own sisterhood. They grew into compassionate, intelligent, and wary young women who understood the importance of independence and self-worth, and I never spoke to David again. I would occasionally see his name in the news. His firm had collapsed. He had tried to rebrand, to start over, but the stain of his scandal was permanent. He became a cautionary tale in the architectural world, a ghost of his former self. Years later, my oldest daughter, Grace, was getting married. She was marrying a wonderful young man who adored her. The night before her wedding, she came to me, her eyes full of love and a little bit of fear. "Mom," she said, "how do you ever really know you can trust someone? After what happened with Dad, how do you make those promises?" And I took her hands in mine. "You don't know," I said softly. "There are no guarantees. But you don't make the promises to the other person. Not really. You make them to yourself. You promise yourself that you will be a person of integrity, a person who loves fiercely, and a person who will fight for what is right. Your vows are a measure of your own character, not a contract with someone else's. Your father broke his promises, but he never broke mine. My vows of love and protection for this family held true, and that's why we're here today." NSHE hugged me, her relief palpable. The next day, as I watched her at the altar, her face glowing with happiness, I felt a profound sense of peace. David had tried to teach my daughters that promises were meaningless, that vows were tools for deception, but I had taught them the real lesson, that the most important promises are the ones we keep to ourselves, and that a life built on a foundation of truth, integrity, and a mother's unbreakable love is the only legacy that will truly endure. And decades passed. The world turned, and my life, once shattered, was rebuilt into something more beautiful and resilient than I could have ever imagined. My 7 daughters grew into 7 incredible women, each carving her own path in the world, yet always connected by the invisible thread of their shared history. They were mothers, leaders, creators, and healers. They were my 7 wonders, my true legacy. NTHE Vow Project became a national force for change, helping to reform laws around financial abuse and divorce, and empowering thousands of women to reclaim their lives. My home, once a crime scene, was now the heart of a sprawling, loving family filled with the laughter of my grandchildren. I never sought out news of David, but sometimes it found me. He had faded into obscurity, a footnote in architectural history. He had married Katerina, and she had given him the son he so desperately wanted. But their life, from what I could gather, was not a happy one. His disgrace had followed them, and their son grew up in the shadow of his father's public shame. And one day, an unexpected email arrived. It was from David's son, a young man of 25. He introduced himself and asked if he could meet me. He said he had questions that only I could answer. NMY daughters were protective, wary. "You don't owe him anything, Mom," Olivia said, her voice firm. But I felt a strange sense of obligation, not to David, but to this young man who was an innocent victim in his father's story. I agreed to meet him. Penn, we met in a quiet cafe. He was a handsome young man, with David's features but with a sadness in his eyes that I recognized as my own from long ago. He was polite, respectful, and deeply troubled. "My father," he began, his voice low, "he's a bitter man. He talks about you, about his first family, as the source of all his problems. He says you ruined him. But I read the stories. I read everything. And I know he's the one who lied." NHE looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I need to know. Why did he do it? Was it just because he wanted a son? Was I the reason he destroyed all of you?" And I looked at this young man who had carried the weight of my family's destruction his entire life, and my heart ached for him. "Your father," I said gently, "didn't destroy us because he wanted a son. He destroyed us because he was a weak man who was terrified his legacy wouldn't be what he wanted it to be. He thought a son would secure it. He thought his buildings would secure it. But legacy isn't something you build with steel and glass or pass down through a name. It's something you build with love, with integrity, with the promises you keep when no one is watching." And I told him about his 7 half-sisters, about the incredible women they had become. I showed him pictures on my phone, my pride evident in my smile. "You are not the reason for his actions," I told him firmly. "You are just another person who was hurt by his choices. Your legacy does not have to be his. You get to build your own." NHE wept right there in the cafe. They were tears of relief, the unburdening of a lifetime of misplaced guilt. As we parted ways, he turned to me. "He broke every promise he ever made to you," he said, his voice full of a sorrow that was not his own. And I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. "Yes, he did," I replied. "But in doing so, he forced me to make a new vow, an unspoken one. A vow to myself and to my daughters that we would not be defined by his betrayal. A vow that we would build a life so full of love, success, and happiness that his memory would become nothing more than a shadow. And that, you see, is the one vow that can never be broken." And I walked away from that cafe and back to my life, my beautiful, noisy, loving life. The silence of that empty church was a distant echo now, drowned out by the symphony of a family built not on broken promises, but on the unbreakable strength of a mother's unspoken vow.